I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in The Stream. For thousands of immigrants to the United States, the American dream has turned into a nightmare. More than 2,000 children have been separated from their parents as the government of President Donald Trump enforces a zero-tolerance policy on undocumented immigrants.
And I'm Ahmed Shahabuddin. Today, we'll hear stories from the detention centers and ask immigration experts to weigh in. And of course, we want to hear from all of you. Join us in our YouTube chat.
Democrats forced that law upon our nation. I hate it. I hate to see separation of parents and children. Thank you all for being here.
Pictures of children and minors in cages and heart-wrenching stories of families torn apart continue to emerge and provoke outrage. Protests are growing louder and crossing party lines. But despite the outcry, recent polls show that the policy is supported by many in Trump's core Republican base.
The president has signed an executive order to stop separation of families. But how are the lives of immigrants from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador being affected? We spoke to some people on the streets of Washington, D.C. to get their thoughts.
I just think our politicians should get together and stop this administration from separating families and doing things that are completely against the values of the United States.
But I definitely also hope that this conversation surrounding this particular policy, like since it's so emotional and it's gotten a lot of people's attention, will continue to hold people's attention in the larger public so that they can start thinking about like other pieces of immigration policy rather than just kind of having like an attention span that's dedicated to this one like very emotional issue that involves children, but like gets the conversation going about policy in general.
I personally feel like if I was in a position of leadership pertaining to immigration, I would never let something like this happen. You know, families, families is something I think is very important, and the fact that they're being separated is terrible. Now, I'm from Texas, and so I can only imagine how hot it'd be, how just the natural conditions of what it'd be like staying in places like that. So that is something I'm not very well versed about, but I can only imagine that their conditions are terrible. And so whatever is being done in these separation areas, or the places the kids are staying, I hope that they're having access to water, to cool temperatures, and things of that manner.
Joining us to talk about this, Holly Cooper, co-director of the Immigration Law Clinic at the University of California, Davis. Erica Pinheiro is Policy and Litigation Director at El Otro Lado in Tijuana, Mexico. And Bridget Cambria is an immigration attorney in Oakland, California at the People's Justice Center. Now, I want to start with a clip and welcome to you all. I want to give our viewers a glimpse of what the Trump administration's zero-tolerance policy has meant for one family in particular. Meet one-year-old Mateo, who was separated from his father, who was legally seeking asylum in the U.S. It took 3 months before the boy was allowed to reunite with his mother, shown here in a video captured by filmmaker Malona Badelt. Have a look.
Following U.S. law, Jose turned himself in at the border to ask for asylum. He presented his identification and his son's birth certificate. Immigration officials claimed he was not the father and kept him in detention. Mateo was sent 1,500 miles away to the Office of Refugee Resettlement.
No, es una niña.
Pare, así.
Mira quién viene allá.
Ya viene.
Allá viene, ¿ves?
Ya viene Mateo.
Mira. Ay, espérate, allá ves. Mira. Mate.
Mate. Mateo,
Mi amor. Hola. Mi amor. No conozco mamá, mi amor. ¿Qué fue, mi amor? ¿Qué fue, mi amor? Mira. ¿Y André, mi amor?
¡Mate! ¡Mate! ¡Toma!
Mi amor.
Well, Erica, heartbreaking video there. I think the saddest part is seeing the look in his mother's eyes, and also her younger son when he realizes that his little brother doesn't recognize him. How are Mateo and his family doing today?
Well, Mateo's still having a lot of emotional and behavioral issues resulting from the separation of his family. And actually, when he was returned to his mother, he was infested with lice and filthy. His mother tells me that it looked like he hadn't been bathed with soap in months. And so now he's just now starting to trust his mother again. Unfortunately, his father is still detained at the Otay Mesa detention facility in San Diego. We've tried to arrange for a visit twice, and both times the children were not let into the detention facility. The first time we tried was actually Andre's birthday. He was so excited to see his father and then had to open his birthday presents in the parking lot of the facility. The second time they told us the children had not been cleared. I'm not really sure what kind of clearance process ICE needs for a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, but the fact is they have not been allowed to see their father since they were separated from him in November of 2017.
You know, and hearing you describe, you know, the condition of the family, the shock, but also the physical condition and the torture, essentially, or, you know, the effect on the boy, I should say. Geronimo Saldana, like many people on Twitter, saying, from the articles I've read on the issue, all of the reports coming in from medical professionals agree that this experience is incredibly traumatic and could potentially cause lifelong harm on the child. Of course, I meant trauma, not torture earlier. But we have a clinical psychologist who's weighing in, sent us a video comment really outlining her concerns and what she's doing about it. I'd love to get your thoughts, Bridget. Let's take a listen.
I wrote a letter which has now been signed by over 9,000 mental health professionals, asking the reader, and ideally this administration, to remember what it is like to be a child, to not only talk about this separation policy as policy, but to actually think about the children who are being ripped apart from their parents at the border. We are deeply concerned about the effect that the separation has on these children's brains, on their general well-being, and on the entire trajectory of their lives. And we are demanding that this policy stops immediately.
Bridget, of course, the executive order was signed, but hearing the psychologist there, what comes to mind?
Well, what comes to mind to me is that I'm a practitioner in family detention. I was brought into family separation because we heard of vulnerable cases and started to take them. We know that family detention, even together, causes severe trauma to minors. It causes thoughts of suicide. It causes thoughts of helplessness. So we see that in family detention, and that's when we have a family together. So imagine, I mean, it's hard to even imagine what the psychological effects would be with a child torn from a parent and the instantaneous psychological damage that's done by that. I don't think that psychologists are going to know until we see what happens to these 2,000 to 3,000 children who've been taken, what the exact effects are. But I'm sure that it's going to be startling, and I'm sure that it's going to be lifelong.
Bridget, I want to share with you 2 headlines, and with our audience, of course, because I know you're already familiar with them. This one from the New York Times. Inside the former Walmart, that is now a shelter for almost 1,500 migrant children, and this is in Brownsville, Texas. Here's another headline, this from the AP, and this just came out recently overnight, late last night. On Tuesday night, AP Newsbreak, at least 3 shelters set up for child migrants, and they're what's being called tender age shelters. Can you explain to us what you know about these shelters? What kind of provisions are there for children? What's happening inside? And what do they look like?
Well, to be honest, these new pop-up detention centers for children, I don't believe that there have been cameras inside of them yet. I think that the idea of something called a tender age shelter, which is really a tender age baby jail, is absolutely horrific and probably against any kind of values that we hold as human beings or as Americans. I don't understand how any facility could possibly be licensed that contains minors as young as an infant. I would pretty much guarantee that they probably are not licensed for that purpose. Additionally, if you have a tent city for minors, I have absolutely no idea how any state could possibly license a facility like that. And that is a requirement if you're going to detain children. And something that I'm very terrified about today with an executive order from the Trump administration is, are they going to remove those very simple protections for minors? Protections that include avoiding prolonged detention and avoiding being placed into facilities that are not made to care for children at all.
Holly, you know, a lot of people talking about how this amounts to child abuse. Maybe that's why I used the word torture earlier, just trying to imagine what that would be like. And it's really tough to know because few people have been inside, but people are trying to make sense of why this happened, bringing politics into this. On Twitter, Families Belong Together saying Trump and Sessions are using immigration as an issue to agitate their base for midterm elections, while at the same time trying to wash their hands of this as they lie to the American people. But maybe, you know, the main question that remains that is being discussed on Twitter right here by H.D. Flores is, what happens to the families who were separated under the previous policy now that the order's been signed? What can you tell us about that, Holly?
Well, I've been inside, I've inspected at least 20 different children's detention facilities, and they range all the way from shelter care to juvenile jails, or the Office of Refugee Resettlement is the entity that detains minors and uses juvenile jails, where the conditions can include pepper spray, can include putting children into psychiatric treatment facilities. And we're seeing a huge amount of trauma even before this executive order, because there's trauma not only of family separation, but there's the trauma that detention brings upon a child. Some children are locked in cells for the majority of the day without the right to without any meaningful education. So what we're seeing is when Trump is saying, I'm going to sign an executive order that ends family separation, what he's really saying is, I'm going to hold children with their mothers in facilities that don't meet minimum humanitarian requirements.
So all three of our guests have mentioned this executive order, and that's because it happened just moments before our live air time. Take a look at my computer here. This is just a screenshot that I grabbed as he was about to sign this executive order. This is Trump, U.S. immigration. Signing this order, he said, "We are keeping families together." Now, of course, this, to many people, critics and those who are just observant watchers, would say this is a flip-flop from earlier policy and earlier announcements from people in the Trump administration. And I want to share with our viewers exactly what that looks like. Have a look.
Yes, I am considering, in order to deter more movement along this terribly dangerous network, I am considering exactly that. They will be well cared for as we deal with their parents.
Have you been directed to separate parents from children as a method of deterrence of undocumented immigration?
I have not been directed to do that for purposes of deterrence, no.
I'm sure that people are going to be less likely to bring their kids to America if they get separated than if they live together and get released into the country.
I would cite you to the Apostle Paul and his clear and wise command in Romans 13 to obey the laws of the government, because God has ordained the government for his purposes.
So why doesn't the president pick up the phone and change the policy? He said he hates it.
I think what the president is trying to do is find a long-term fix. So why don't we have Congress change the laws to change... No, Congress could fix this tomorrow.
We want to solve family separation. I don't want children taken away from parents. You're going to have a lot of happy people. Yeah.
Why did you wait so long to sign this coverage?
It's been going on for 60 years. 60 years. Nobody's taken care of it. Nobody's had the political courage to take care of it, but we're going to take care of it. It's been going on for a long time.
Holly, he says no one has had the political courage to take care of it, indicating that he has, even though this policy was enacted underneath his administration. Holly, please clarify this for our American audience and our international audience. You must be scratching their heads.
Yes, it's really about deflecting the issue and mischaracterizing what's going on so that he appears to be the hero in the equation when he's really the villain. And what's happening is that the Flores settlement that he's in this executive order seeking to modify has set forth very basic protections for detained children to be reunited with their family members expeditiously and to be detained in facilities that have minimum state licensing requirements. And now what he's saying is that he wants to, modify the Flores settlement agreement. It's not clear how, but one can speculate that he'll want to detain families and children together to create sort of modern day internment camps where children and mothers will be detained together throughout the fruition of their proceedings, which is going to, have its own psychological toll on the children for being detained is also a harm in addition to being separated from their parents.
And we've
go ahead.
We've already seen that they've built these tent cities to detain children, and so the logical next step would be to house families in those facilities. And I also want to say, just working on the border here, I don't believe that they're actually going to stop family separation. The case of Jose de Marfuentes, the family that was featured in the video you showed earlier, caught the attention of numerous congresspeople who held hearings with the Department of Homeland Security who denied that they were separating families when we had proof that they were. In those cases, the Department of Homeland Security claimed that the parents didn't have proof of the parental relationship when in fact they were handing over original birth certificates and passports to the Department of Homeland Security. So I don't believe they're going to stop family separation. It might be less than they're doing right now, but I don't believe that they're going to stop it. They're just going to use these post hoc excuses to try to justify what they're doing.
And in terms of trying to justify what they're doing, a lot of the comments, Malika, I have to be honest with our audience, with everyone here, it's really still shock and disbelief even after this announcement, this flip-flop, whatever you want to call it, this announcement by President Trump. As vague as it is, Richard Uku saying separating families and causing such distress to children and their parents is simply the most shocking thing this U.S. administration has done since its inception. As a parent, my stomach keeps turning. Can there possibly be a lower low than this? How can any parent sanction this? And, these might seem like kind of rhetorical questions almost, but we do have kind of a question specifically about Jeff Sessions and the policy moving forward. Someone saying Jeff Sessions has a clear agenda. This represents the clear agenda for the Justice Department, including ramping up new ways of criminalizing and incarcerating people while rolling back criminal justice and policing reforms. Based on what you just said, Erica, do you think that that's true, that this is an agenda by this administration and that's the fight that's going to continue from here on out?
Absolutely, and this is just one policy of many that has sought to stem the flow of asylum seekers, especially from Central America. The administration has demonized Central Americans as MS-13 gang members when in fact a lot of these people are fleeing gang violence. Jeff Sessions recently changed the law to try to exclude victims of domestic violence and victims of gang violence from asylum protections. And let's just step back for a second and also recognize that seeking asylum is legal immigration. So a lot of the rhetoric going on right now, calling these people illegal immigrants, is just absolutely wrong. They have the right to seek asylum under U.S. law and under international law, whether or not they enter the United States at a designated port of entry.
I'm glad you clarified that, because I want to bring this up here. Some may see this as a PR disaster for the United States and for the administration. Others, not so much. This is via Vox, and they are citing several polls. Trump's family separation policy is very unpopular, except among some Republicans. One study finds 66% of Americans opposed it and 27% in favor. There are people who say this will be a deterrent. And people in the administration also have said that the idea is this will cause the numbers to decrease, even though we've seen a recent spike in the last few months. Bridget, I'm wondering what you think of the idea of deterrence and the people in the U.S. population who say our borders are there for a reason.
Well, I have to agree that I absolutely believe that the policies of the administration for family separation, family detention, the whole purpose of what they're doing is deterrence. their idea is if they punish the people who they have custody of, then they'll stop other people from coming. Unfortunately, we found that's not the case. It's never the case. People will not stay in a burning building. If they're in a burning building and their lives in danger, or their children's lives are in danger, they're going to flee. And the administration has clearly enacted the family separation policy, family detention policy, and other policies in order to deter people from seeking asylum in the United States. But it's not going to work. In addition to it not working, it's illegal. The government cannot use deterrent policies against people in their custody to prevent actions from other people. Go ahead.
Of course, I was just going to say we'd have to prove that that is the policy, right? That it was, you know, a deterrent. We saw those questions asked to the Homeland Security head, and she denied them.
She denied them, but other members of the administration did not deny them, and actually expressly stated them, that they are for deterrent purposes. And I think that there's plenty in the record to show that. It's just one person, you know, walking back those comments because they know legally it's not a good position to be in.
So where do we go from here? Because Sean on Twitter is asking, you know, what happens to the families that have been separated? The U.S. government, he says, is still culpable because they have not put in place a mechanism of reuniting the families after separation or deportation. Any sense of if that is beginning to happen, or will have to happen, or will happen at all?
Well, let me just tell you one thing. In the case of some of the families that we've represented, we are suing for the immediate reunification of children with their parents. In the case we filed for 2 boys who have been separated from their fathers, not given any communication. The fathers, in fact, had no idea where they were. The fathers had no idea even what the identification number that immigration would use for them was. We had to find that as attorneys, and to be honest, most families who are separated don't have attorneys. So how are they going to find their children? This is a huge problem for the administration because right now we have about 3,000 children without parents. And what mechanisms are they going to put to bring these families together, I think should be their #1 priority. And what they should be doing is within the next 24 hours, 48 hours, week, be immediately reunifying all of these children who are separated from their parents with their parents.
Holly, I know you wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, I mean, we have a big concern because we represent the nation class of children who are detained. And a lot of the children are too young to even identify to us the family's phone numbers, basic biographical information. So we have a big concern also from the children's perspective as to how are they going to find their parents when they want to reach out. Because the children are at such tender age that they can't meaningfully articulate basic identifying information. And ORR, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, refuses to give us that information as advocates, as lawyers for the children.
I wanted to share with our audience this, Erica. We have just about a minute in the show left, but this is reunite an immigrant parent with their child. And if you've been on Facebook in the last few days, you have seen this fundraiser for RISIS. They've raised $12 million to go towards legal fees and for reunification. What would you tell people watching who want to do something, Erica?
Well, definitely donating to the organizations working on the ground. ISIS is an excellent organization. There are several other organizations, including Bridget's organization, my own, the Keno Border Initiative, et cetera. There's lists out there. I think Slate put out a list. Donating to these organizations will allow us to hire attorneys to help these people because, as Bridget and Holly mentioned, we have thousands of children who've been separated from their parents who have really no other way to be reunified. Today, I have a Guatemalan father who's being deported without his 5-year-old child. If I weren't helping him, and trust me, it's difficult still to get them reunited. If I weren't helping him, he'd really have no way to figure out how to get his daughter back. So those of us working on the ground are really going to put these resources to good use.
Right. You're hearing from Erica Pinheiro. You heard from Holly Cooper and Bridget Cambry, and of course to our community. We have to leave the conversation there, but thank you for being part of this show today. We'll continue to follow the story as it develops. We'll see you next time.